Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's Senate Committee on Revenue and Economic Development. Will the Secretary please proceed to call the roll?
Senator Cruz Crawford?
Here.
Senator Steinbeck?
Here.
Senator Stone? Acting Chair Doñate?
And I'm here, and please mark Senator Neal absent excused. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today we do have a bill hearing on Senate Bill 41. And so I would like to welcome folks. For those who want to participate during the hearing process, we ask for folks to please sign in by the check-in desk so we can get a record. And then obviously, we will limit the comments to 2 minutes each for testimony. And so I want to go ahead and call our folks forward, and I'm going to go ahead and open the bill hearing on Senate Bill 41. This bill revises provisions relating to the taxation of cannabis establishments, and so please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and committee members. My name is Shelley Hughes, Executive Director for the Nevada Department of Taxation. I have with me today Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, Chief Deputy Executive Director. Together, we will be presenting an overview of Senate Bill 41 and a proposed conceptual amendment. By the way of reminder to this committee, the state imposes excise taxes on wholesale and retail sales of cannabis, as well as a sales tax on cannabis and cannabis products. NRS 372-290 subsections 1 and 2 establish an excise tax at the rate of 15% of the fair market value at wholesale of cannabis. The tax is the obligation of the cultivation facility and is levied on the first transfer of cannabis from a cultivation facility. The wholesale cannabis tax revenue is distributed to the Cannabis Compliance Board. NRS 372A.290 subsection 3 establishes an excise tax on the retail sale of cannabis and cannabis products by a retail cannabis store, a retail cannabis consumption lounge, and an independent cannabis consumption lounge at the rate of 10% of the sales price. Cannabis or cannabis products sold to the patient cardholder are not subject to the 10% retail cannabis tax. The tax is the obligation of the adult use retail store, retail cannabis consumption lounge, and the independent cannabis consumption lounge, but may be recovered from the purchaser. The retail cannabis tax revenue is distributed to the State Education Fund. Sales tax is also due on the retail sale of cannabis and cannabis products and the other tangible personal property sold by cannabis entities. Retail cannabis stores, retail cannabis consumption lounges, and the independent cannabis consumption lounges must file a monthly sales tax return. That includes taxable sales for adult use cannabis and cannabis products and taxable sales to patient card holders, in addition to the cannabis excise tax return. As we have presented to this committee on prior occasions, the sales tax rate is made up of a minimum rate of 6.85%, as well as additional local sales tax options. In 2019, the Cannabis Compliance Board, or CCB, was created with the Senate Bill 533, and CCB took over the regulation of cannabis licensees, while the Department of Taxation remained responsible for tax obligations. However, this dual agency oversight has resulted in the CCB becoming responsible for enforcing tax obligations and deficiencies through its authority over licensing. SB 41 aims to streamline the administrative processes related to tax compliance and impacts to suspension or revocation of a cannabis license for failure to satisfy tax obligations through the imposition of a cannabis tax permit from the Department of Taxation. This bill would require sellers of cannabis or cannabis product subject to the excise tax to obtain a cannabis tax permit from the department in addition to a seller's permit as applicable. A cannabis business must renew its license on an annual basis with the Cannabis Compliance Board, and to qualify for renewal of the license, the business must be current with its cannabis tax obligations with the Department of Taxation, including filing returns and remitting payments. Business entities may enter into a payment plan under certain circumstances to pay outstanding tax liabilities. At times, cannabis businesses fail to submit required tax returns or pay the tax liability owed to the state. Alternatively, we have cannabis businesses that will enter into a payment plan with the department in order to renew their license with CCB, then they default on that payment plan immediately after. Upon renewal of the CCB license, the business is allowed to operate for another year and may continue to accumulate a huge debt to the state. The department has no ability to stop the tax liability from continuing to accrue for another year after the CCB license is re-awarded or renewed, and many cannabis businesses have ended up going into receivership and the state loses out on that revenue. By requiring cannabis businesses to obtain a cannabis tax permit, in addition to the seller's permit from the department to operate in Nevada, the department can have a role in protecting the state's revenue outside of the annual renewal process. I will now turn the presentation over to Chief Deputy Navarez Goodson to present the various provisions of the bill along with a proposed conceptual amendment. Notably, the department worked with industry on this proposed amendment, as well as feedback from CCB and the department's internal stakeholders who audit and process cannabis accounts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Yvonne Navarez Goodson, Chief Deputy Executive Director for the Department of Taxation. Today, I'd like to present an overview of SB 41 along with the department's proposed conceptual amendment, which takes into account feedback that the department has received from both industry, the Cannabis Compliance Board, as well as our internal staff who work on the cannabis accounts for the department. Cannabis license renewals and other disciplinary actions, including civil penalties, suspension, and revocation of cannabis licenses, are governed by the Cannabis Compliance Board pursuant to NRS Chapter 678B. CCB has existing regulations governing disciplinary actions, including provisions for licensees that fail to comply with the various tax obligations from the Department of Taxation. Under existing CCB regulations, a licensee must operate with all required permits, pay taxes to the department, and file monthly tax and sales reports or payments to the department. Failure to satisfy these tax obligations results in various categories of violations and resulting consequences, including civil penalties and potential suspension or revocation of a license. These violations would similarly impact renewals. The CCB is proposing to amend each of these violations related to tax issues and create a new, less serious violation for failing timely to pay taxes or file returns, which penalties would decrease from civil penalties and potential suspension or revocation to written warnings, significantly decrease civil penalties and minor suspensions. In light of these proposed changes from CCB and for the reasons described by Director Hughes regarding the intent of SB 41, the department and the CCB would prefer for the department to enforce and conduct hearings regarding tax-related obligations of these cannabis entities. SB 41 accomplishes this goal through the existing requirements of a seller's permit for sales tax purposes and the new cannabis tax permit for the cannabis excise taxes, and regarding which the department may suspend or revoke such permits. A final decision regarding suspension or revocation of such permits will result in automatic suspension of the applicable cannabis license by CCB until the taxpayer can become compliant with outstanding tax liabilities. Accordingly, if SB 41 is enacted as amended, it is anticipated that CCB would remove its regulatory provisions governing license discipline for failure to comply with tax obligations and rely on the requirements of this bill for suspension of a license in respect to its tax obligations. Sections 1 through 6 of this bill provide for various definitions applicable to the provisions of the bill related to businesses and persons which sell cannabis or cannabis products in Nevada. Former Section 6, revised by amendment as Section 7, governs the establishment of the cannabis tax permit. This section, as amended, differentiates between a seller's permit, which is already applicable to persons who sell cannabis and cannabis products and are responsible for remitting sales tax to the department, and the new cannabis tax permit. Under this section, a person must obtain both a seller's permit and a cannabis tax permit before the CCB may approve the applicable license pursuant to NRS Chapter 678B. Finally, this section requires the department to issue the cannabis tax permit within 15 days of receipt of an application. Notably, the department will not be charging a fee for this cannabis tax permit. Former Section 7, which is revised by amendment as Section 8, requires the department to grant and issue a cannabis tax permit for each place of business within the county and provide the applicant with full written explanation of the tax liability of the permit holder for the collection and payment of applicable excise taxes. Such permit is non-transferable. This section is modeled after the same requirements for a seller's permit in NRS Chapter 360. Former Section 8, which is revised by amendment as Section 9, governs the notice and hearing provisions for suspension or revocation of a cannabis tax permit. The proposed amendments to this section confirm the distinction between a seller's permit, which again is applicable to sales taxes, and the cannabis tax permit, which is applicable to the cannabis excise taxes. Subsection 1 confirms that any hearing for suspension or revocation of the cannabis tax permit must be held not later than 30 days after notice, unless such hearing is continued by the department for not more than an additional 30 days. However, a permit holder for a cannabis tax permit will also be provided an opportunity to cure the tax deficiency before the notice of hearing is even issued. The opportunity to cure requires notice by the department of the nature of the deficiency, along with 60 days to pay or execute a payment plan to pay the debt, or alternatively to cure any debt on an existing payment plan. If the deficiency or default cannot be cured within those 30 days, the department will issue the notice of a hearing to initiate proceedings for suspension or revocation of that permit. Upon conclusion of a hearing, the department will issue a written decision regarding suspension or revocation within 30 days, and the permit holder will have an additional 30 days thereafter to file an appeal with the Nevada Tax Commission. The Tax Commission will consider the matter at its next available public meeting and issue the decision within 30 days after that meeting. A final decision of the Tax Commission is also subject to judicial review. A final decision of the department, if the matter is not appealed to the Tax Commission, or a decision of the Tax Commission, if the department's decision was appealed to it, must be provided to the permit holder and also submitted to CCB. Upon receipt, the Cannabis Compliance Board will deem the applicable license to be suspended on the day the final decision was issued. Section 9 of the bill, which is revised by amendment as Section 10, provides for the judicial review of such final decision. This language is identical to the language authorizing judicial review in other final decisions of the Nevada Tax Commission or the Nevada Department of Taxation, as set forth in NRS 360.395. And for a person to seek judicial review from a final decision, the person must first pay the amount of any outstanding tax liability or enter into a written payment installment agreement before that judicial review can be filed. The new Section 11 set forth in the proposed conceptual amendment governs transfers of interest of cannabis licensees, which is a commonplace transaction. The language models existing language for other taxpayers in NRS Chapter 360, which provides sufficient time for the department to determine the amount of tax liability of a licensee wishing to obtain a transfer of interest. NRS 678B.380 provides that licenses are non-transferable except as provided by regulation of the CCB. CCB's regulations 5.110 and 5.112 provide requirements for transferring all or a portion of ownership in a cannabis business. The Department of Taxation often becomes involved in these transfers of interest where there is an outstanding tax liability by a person or entity seeking to transfer its ownership in a license, which most often occurs around the time of renewal. As indicated above, for a license to be renewed, the license must be timely on its tax obligations under existing law. In accordance therewith, if a person or entity seeks such a transfer, the department may enter into a conditional transfer of interest with the licensee and with CCB to ensure that the payment of all outstanding excise taxes through the sale or transfer of proceeds, including requiring such proceeds from any sale or transfer to be put into escrow for the benefit of the department. The department often reserves its rights to pursue responsible persons and successor liability on outstanding tax liabilities for non-payment through these agreements. It is in the interest of a licensee to pay the outstanding tax obligation to settle the debt, to allow for renewal of the license, or for the new owner of the license under the transfer. This section again models existing language for other taxpayers in NRS Chapter 360, which provides sufficient time for the department to determine the amount of tax liability of a licensee wishing to enter into this transfer of interest. Sections 10 through 12 of the bill, which are revised by amendment as sections 12 through 14, make various conforming changes to the bill. And section 13, which is revised by amendment as section 15, relates to the action to be taken by CCB against a licensee whose seller's permit or cannabis tax permit are suspended or revoked by the department. If the hearing decision or decision of the Nevada Tax Commission, as applicable, supports revocation or suspension of a seller's permit or cannabis tax permit, the bill would provide for automatic suspension of the cannabis license by CCB to prevent the business from continuing to operate and establishing more debt to the state. Once the business becomes compliant with the Department of Taxation, CCB will lift that suspension. And finally, section 16, it's a new section in the proposed conceptual amendment. This section is intended to provide clarity about the effective date of the bill and to address the timing by which existing licensees must become compliant with their tax obligations for purposes of obtaining their cannabis tax permit. The department is requesting an effective date of December 1st, 2026, by which time our cannabis excise taxes will have been implemented into the department's new tax system known as MINT. Furthermore, the department believes that providing more than a year from the enactment of this legislation for an existing licensee to become compliant with their tax obligations is more than sufficient to qualify for the permit. If the licensee cannot accomplish this compliance timeline, this section confirms that the department will immediately issue a notice to CCB for the license to be suspended in the same fashion as it would be under Section 15 of the bill. And with that, Mr. Chair, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Committee members, any questions? Senator Steinbeck.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I've got two questions, if I may. The first question that I have is, and I know you just explained this pretty thoroughly, but the need for the additional permit versus simply enforcing it on the sales permit, is that not an option?
Excuse me, Shelley Hughes for the record. For our wholesale cannabis entities, they do not need a seller's tax permit because they do not sell at retail. So if we just enforce through a seller's tax permit, we wouldn't have the opportunity to collect on any of those wholesale.
So this only applies back on the wholesale side?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Shelley Hughes for the record. This would apply for both, for
Okay.
retail. In addition, because at renewal, the CCB looks mainly at the cannabis excise taxes. So at the retail side, we would need it for both retailers and wholesalers.
Okay, and so the sales permit is only on the retail side, and so there's no enforcement arm over on the wholesale side, other than you could suspend their cannabis license, right? Is that?
I think it may help to clarify the distinction. So a seller's permit is applicable to for sales tax purposes. And so the cannabis tax permit that we're contemplating is going to be applicable to the excise taxes, so the wholesale and the retail excise tax. So in our vision, we would want a deficiency of sales tax to be handled under existing law for a seller's permit as it already is contemplated under Chapter 360. The cannabis tax permit follows generally that structure with a different hearing timeline for the excise permits, or for the excise taxes, both retail and wholesale. Does that help?
It does, it does. I was just wondering if there was a way, or if you had discussed consolidating it, right? So there's not multiple permits and multiple process going on at the same time, which is always what we want to try to accomplish.
Again, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson for the record, through you to Senator Steinbeck. I think one of our thoughts on keeping the seller's permit the same is that anybody responsible to the Department for Sales Tax would be treated the same under the seller's permit and those processes that are engaged in for suspension or revocation of a seller's permit. So all of the processes internally with the department would remain the same for that purpose. And when we're talking about the excise tax deficiencies under the cannabis tax permit, we would follow the hearing procedure as set forth in the bill.
Thank you. Senator Stone.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My concern is that we're complicating an already complex compliance program. So I understand we have an excise tax at the wholesale level. We have a retail tax at the retail level, wholesale versus retail level. But to sell under any environment, you need to have a license from CCB, correct? So to me, it seems like the hammer is the CCB license. If you don't pay your taxes, then you should get your license suspended or, in a worst-case scenario, revoked. And I think you alluded to the fact that the cannabis tax permit that you propose, there's no fee associated with it, correct? But it's still another piece of paperwork that a cannabis establishment is going to have to provide every single year. And so I guess my question is, why not just, you have the hammer of the license, why don't you just hold the license if you don't pay your taxes? I think that's probably incentive enough instead of creating yet another layer of bureaucracy.
I think our hope and our intention actually was to provide a streamlined approach and one hearing process. So currently, the department works diligently with CCB, and it usually happens around the time of renewal. And what will occur is we will identify a number of licensees that are out of tax compliance at the time of renewal for CCB, and then CCB has to come back to the department and get all of the tax information from the department in order to determine what it will do with respect to the cannabis license. And so our hope was we could streamline all of the regulations that the Cannabis Compliance Board currently has with respect to the tax obligations, turn them into the department's obligation. I think it's my understanding CCB would support a more streamlined approach to the tax obligation side of enforcement for these entities, so that the department already has the information, we already have the processes in place and the administrative law judges in place to handle these hearings, and it would be akin to the types of hearings that we're doing for the seller's permit. So the goal actually was to streamline this.
Shelley Hughes for the record. I just wanted to add that the cannabis tax permit is a one-time process, so it would not be renewed annually. They would just have to apply for the permit upon getting their license, and it would stay in existence until it was suspended or revoked.
So is tax deficiencies among cannabis businesses, is it a highly prevalent problem that you're experiencing? And is it something that is not caught until somebody is renewing their CCB license? Or why aren't we having better communication with the Department of Taxation as they become delinquent and streamline in that way? Again, I just feel like the hammer is the license, and I'm just worried that we're creating another avenue here. Thank you.
Shelley Hughes for the record. As of February 2025, there's 251 cannabis accounts registered with the department. 153 of those are non-compliant. For wholesale marijuana tax, the total amount due is $4.9 million, and for retail marijuana tax, it's $617,000. So we do produce a report each month for CCB on the 20th of each month. We are actively collecting on these accounts, and we're working towards getting them into compliance. So it is an effort between CCB and ourselves to work through these. So we think that with the cannabis excise tax permit, the process may be, as Chief Deputy Navarez-Goodson mentioned, more streamlined.
With respect to your other comment about the license ultimately being the hammer, this bill contemplates the same thing. So Section 15 of the bill, after due process is conducted for the licensee at the department level, and we get all the way through to a final decision, the hammer is ultimately that we report that to CCB, and they automatically then suspend that license pending compliance with their tax obligations. So that hammer remains in place. It's just triggered now differently through our hearing process and final decision versus this annual renewal process.
Last follow-up, if that's okay. So Following your process, somebody is suspended. They bring their tax liability current, then their licenses become active again. Is there a probationary period? I mean, that we see there's a problem with this particular vendor?
Thank you for the question, Senator Stone. Again, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson for the record. So in terms of the bill, if a licensee then becomes compliant with their tax obligations, we reinstate the tax permit, notify CCB, and they automatically lift the suspension upon confirmation that they're compliant.
Thank you so much. Any other further questions? I think you answered mine regarding the delinquency, so I think we're pretty much good. Obviously, if you can follow up with us in terms of any other documents, that would be greatly appreciated. Let's go ahead and open it up for testimony. So if you would like to support this bill, please come forward, either here in Carson or in Las Vegas. I don't see anyone here. Let's go to AVH. Is there anyone online in support of the bill?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue.
Correction, to provide testimony in support to Senate Bill 41, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to opposition. If you are here opposed to this bill, please come forward. Seeing none here in Las Vegas, AVH, is there anyone online?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 41, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to neutral. Is there anyone that would like to testify in neutral on this bill? Seeing none here in Las Vegas, AVH, is there anyone online?
Chair, there are no callers at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hughes, did you have any?
Actually, Chair,
Oh.
there is a caller. Let's just go ahead and confirm if they wanted to testify in neutral. Caller,
Sure.
to testify in neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Thank you, Chair. There are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hughes?
Thank you, Shelley Hughes for the record. I want to thank you all for hearing this bill. I just wanted to add some additional information that I didn't have a chance to add during our testimony. With this process, it does give a cannabis entity additional due process rights. They would be able to appeal, have their decision heard by an ALJ, and then again by the Nevada Tax Commission, so that if there is a mistake where they believe they do not have a tax liability, they would have that opportunity to argue and appeal that decision. Where with the renewal process with the CCB, it wouldn't go through that same process. So thank you again for considering this bill.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing, and now we have arrived at the last agenda item, which is public comment. If there's anyone that would like to provide public comment, now would be the time. Seeing none here or in Las Vegas, AVH, is there anyone online?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. That concludes the items for today. We greatly appreciate everyone for joining us, and the meeting is now adjourned. We look forward to seeing everyone this Thursday.